Okay. Good evening. It's my pleasure tonight to present a summary of student achievement data for the 2020-2021 school year. As you're all aware, we are coming off another disrupted school year that has affected the students and staff of our district in many different ways. The data I present to you today are but one measure in the journey of our students and staff, and should in no way be considered a comprehensive evaluation of the learning that occurred this year. Along the way, I will detail some of the limitations of this year's data. First, a note about the end-of-course examination program. As you know, the EOC exams were canceled in the spring of 2020. Furthermore, the state, while returning to the mandatory administration of the EOC exams, recognized the wide variability of educational experiences taking place around the state in the 2020-2021 school year. Consequently, the department granted districts flexibility in the amount of weight the EOC exams carried on a student's final grade. Our district opted to reduce the weight from 20% to 10% of the final grade and hold students harmless for the score. In other words, students had to take the test, but the test only counted in the final grade if it would improve that grade. As a result, we will not be reporting EOC scores tonight because the data are not representative of what our students know and are able to do. In order to get a grasp on what students do know and are able to do, we designed our academic recovery plan to use our interim assessment systems to identify gaps in learning for these students this fall so that teachers can provide appropriate instruction to close those gaps. We begin tonight with English Language Arts. Shown here is a summary of the percentage of students at all grades who met or exceeded standards on the SC Ready ELA assessment. As you'll see in this graph and many of the graphs that follow, there are no 2020 scores and there is a drop from 2019 to 2021. It's important to note that a variety of factors may have contributed to this decline. First, the effects of the pandemic disruption was felt in all subjects across the state and nation. Secondly, one of the effects of the pandemic was that fewer students actually took the assessment, even though our district is rapidly growing. With the implementation of a consistent instructional model, you can see that in the years leading up to the pandemic, our ELA scores were steadily increasing. Even with a slight decline this year, our scores still came in higher than our 2017 levels. Here's how the performance of Lexington District One students compares to the state on ELA. As you can see here, our district outperformed the state. This is a consistent pattern over the years. I mentioned before that fewer students actually took the exam. This table shows that 1,320 fewer students, that's about 10% fewer, students took the exam in 2021 than in 2019. This is a common theme across all tests. Concern about the virus, transportation issues, other concerns resulted in substantially fewer students being tested. This lower participation takes away from the comprehensive value of the test results. We will look closely at interim assessment results this fall at all levels in order to get a more accurate picture of our students' strengths and areas of opportunity. Here are the mean and standard deviations for the ELA's SC Ready test. Again, because of the disruption and the lower test participation, we have to take many of these results with a grain of salt. The end of course exam has moved to English 2 now. It used to be English 1. And with those scores being questionable this year, a close look at course grades is appropriate. This graph shows that 90% of students received a passing grade in English 2, with 78% receiving a C or higher. The pass rate is very comparable to that of pre-pandemic levels of 2019. It's actually 1 point higher. The C or higher rate for the past year is higher, but still reasonably comparable at +8 points. All right, moving on to math. Here are the percentages of students meeting or exceeding standard on the SC Ready math exam. Again, we see the decline after the COVID disruption. However, we also see that while we were making some improvement prior to the disruption, the growth is relatively flat. Across the state, the pandemic appeared to impact math achievement more than ELA. Statewide in ELA, grade level declines averaged 2.8 points, while in math, grade level declines averaged 7.9 points. Prior to the pandemic, we recognized the need for a more consistent instructional model in math, similar to that implemented in ELA. To that end, the district had just begun implementing Math Workshop when the pandemic hit. As part of our academic recovery plan, we will be addressing mathematics achievement and specifically middle school math as a priority. One of these strategies is to continue to implement Math Workshop in order to improve math performance. We will also be providing targeted professional learning opportunities around high leverage math instructional strategies. Again, while we did see a drop in math achievement on SC Ready, we still continue to outperform the state. And again, we saw a substantial decrease in the number of students taking the exam. So again, about 10% fewer this year than in 2019. And here are your summary statistics for mathematics by grade. So the pattern of post-pandemic achievement is also evident here in the high school Algebra 1 grade distributions. In Algebra 1, we saw a pass rate of 86% compared to 90% in English 2. Also, the percent scoring C or higher in Algebra 1 was 75% compared to 78% in English 2. Part of this could be because of the pandemic impact, but part of it could also be attributed to the educational maturity of the students who are typically enrolled in these classes. As you know, Algebra 1 are typically 8th graders or freshmen, every now and then a 10th grader or two, while your English 2 kids are 10th and sometimes 11th graders. Or your high-flying 9th graders as well.
Is this across all levels of Algebra 1?
Yes, just the algebra. Well, not like you're talking about like introduction to algebra and foundations. This is just the Algebra 1 course.
Okay, so it would include like
a Algebra
1 honors, Algebra 1.
It includes all of that. Yes, sir.
Gotcha.
The pass rates were identical to 2019 prior to the pandemic. The percent scoring C or higher was a bit higher this year, plus 10 points. All right, Science SC Ready is only given in grades 4 and 6 now, and that's important, and I can talk about that if you'd like. Similar to math, we saw a drop in performance after the pandemic, but also somewhat stagnant growth prior to the disruption. Over the past few years, we have prioritized professional learning around literacy and math. Moving forward, we continue to layer on subject areas now that teachers are becoming more proficient in our established instructional models. This will allow us to focus on deeper levels of learning in other disciplines. Last year, we continued to outperform the state overall. However, the percent of students exceeding standard was about equal to that of the state. And again, we had substantially fewer students take the science exam compared to 2019. And this time it was about 14% fewer students. A difference of about 600 kids. Again, here are our summary statistics. Grade distributions in Biology 1, however, indicate high levels of achievement, with 91.3% passing the course and about 82% achieving a C or higher. These rates are pretty comparable to the pre-pandemic rates of 2019. The pass rate was slightly lower at -3 points, and the C or higher rate was slightly higher at +2 points. So we have no good standardized test data available for social studies this year. Grade distributions in U.S. history courses suggest high levels of achievement with 93.1% of students passing the course and 91% scoring C or higher. Note that these are 11th grade students who are more mature and more invested in school. Pass rates were very similar to those of 2019 at +1 point, and C or higher rates were a bit higher at +8 points. Okay, this is our 4-year cohort adjusted graduation rate trend compared to that of the state over the past few years. I want to point out 2017 and 2018. In 2017, districts were allowed to remove students who transferred to adult education in a diploma track from their graduation cohort. However, in 2018, that rule was changed. Notice a substantial drop in graduation rates both in our district and at the state level. This year, in the wake of the pandemic disruption, our graduation rate is down slightly from 2020. However, we still graduated 90% of our students on time even after this cohort endured 2 years of pandemic disruption. So, I'd like to take a minute here to talk about the 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate. We're proud to be a district that parents trust with students who are served in special education. But we have to also accept that based on the way the graduation rate is calculated, 100% graduation rate is impossible, and even 95% is incredibly difficult to achieve because these students are counted in our cohort, but since they do not earn a diploma, they count against us even though they complete a course of study. The current calculation method does not honor the accomplishment of these students. We are also proud that we have an adult education program that serves the needs of students for whom a traditional high school track may not be appropriate. However, if a student transfers to adult education and earns a GED, they count against us in the graduation rate, even though many of them complete a course of study. If we look at students who actually complete a course of study in our schools, our success rate is actually about 91.5%. I think this is more reflective of our school's ability to help students succeed. Now we move on to the progress on our strategic plan goals. As Dr. Little mentioned, we will be talking a little bit more in depth about the strategic plan and our plans to revise and modify some of these goals based on what has happened as a result of the pandemic on your September 21st meeting. However, for now, for your reference, any cell with a green background indicates progress over the prior year. Red text indicates that we did not meet whatever goal it was that we set. Blue text indicates that the goal was achieved. There's no doubt that progress on our strategic plan suffered as a result of the pandemic. As you'll see on the next few slides, we were making good progress in many areas. For example, in elementary grades, prior to the pandemic, we were trending in the right direction prior to 2019-2020. Most of the goals shown here are end-of-year measures, and as we are all aware, those measures were completely thrown off by the onset of COVID in 2020. State tests were canceled, and true end-of-the-year text level assessments were not able to be conducted appropriately. Following the spring of 2020, we began to see the effects of that lost time. We have recognized this and have designed our academic recovery plan to address the gaps that arose over the past couple of years. Another thing that we recognize is that our stated goal of reducing the number of students in tiers 2 and 3 of intervention may not be appropriate given the current reality. Because of the pandemic disruption, our students need more intervention and not less. Therefore, instruction will be working to revise this goal into something more appropriate for the circumstances. At middle school, again, you can see that we were making some progress prior to the pandemic. In 18-19, we actually surpassed our interim goal in ELA and made some progress in math. We also saw reductions in the number of students in higher levels of intervention. After the pandemic, though, we will need to recover in all of these areas. Again, it is appropriate to rethink the intervention goal given the times. At the high school level, you can see that we made some progress before, during, and after the disruption. In 2019 and 2020, we were showing great gains in the percentage of ninth grade students on track for graduation and progress in 10th graders on track. However, both declined in 2020-2021. We are consistently growing in the percentage of our juniors who are on track for an on-time graduation. However, we are falling short of our 98% goal. We also continue to improve in the percentage of students meeting college and career readiness benchmarks. You can see our graduation rate here, which we talked about earlier. There was a concerning decline in the percent of students entering higher education, military careers, or obtaining industry certification. This is in part due to students not taking certification exams due to unavailability or because of COVID concerns. I spoke to Mr. Myers about this just to verify, and he clarified that many of the CTE courses were made available to students in Lula, but many of them did not come to the school and face-to-face to take advantage of those, and so they weren't able to complete those sort of prerequisites for the certification exam. Oh, he also indicated that we were back on track this year. All right, so the next couple of slides deal with our gifted populations. Rigorous course enrollment and equity continues to grow at all grade levels, while dual enrollment numbers continue to increase at our high schools. Combined enrollment in AP, IB, and dual enrollment courses was the one decline we saw in this area last year. Part of this could be due to the limited catalog of advanced courses we were able to support for Lula students. The effects of the pandemic were no stranger to our gifted students. The percentages of students exceeding standard were steadily increasing before the pandemic in all subjects. Following the disruption, there was a decrease in these percentages across the board. The one exception to that was in middle school ELA, where we actually showed an increase in students exceeding standard over the 2019 administration. Pass rates on AP tests slightly declined as well. Chronic absenteeism became a much bigger problem over the past 2 years. Online learning and hybrid models presented new challenges for student attendance and accountability. Discipline has improved substantially over the past 2 years, probably due to models introduced to combat the pandemic and an emphasis on student advocacy and social emotional learning. Here is that same information about chronic absenteeism for high school, and the same trend holds true. Finally, we did see some improvement in perceptions about staff resources for professional development and the ability of teachers to solve problems in innovative ways. However, we did see declines in satisfaction with the social and physical environments of the schools and homeschool relations. Again, as Dr. Little mentioned, we will be revisiting the strategic plan at the September 21st meeting to talk about how we would like to revise and improve the plan. Whew. At this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Dr. Phillips, did you see any variation between our Lula kids and our face-to-face instruction kids? Were there any themes in that?
Nothing super substantial here and there, and I can get you that data if you would like, but certainly there was some variability there, but nothing substantial that I can recall.
And then any theories why ELA seemed to continue to progress versus mathematics? It seems like with Khan Academy, and I'm not as a non-educator,
Yeah.
I don't know. I just find that interesting.
So, and I can defer to Mary some on this, but I would say that having a consistent instructional model across the board was very helpful along that, which is what we were moving to in math when the pandemic hit. So we had the Lucy Calkins units of study, reading, writing, am I saying this right? Yeah, reading and writing workshop was consistent across all our schools at multiple grade levels, right? But math, we were just starting to implement that. And so I think that's a big difference in that. Also, and Hillary can probably speak to this, the nature of mathematics, with ELA, you tend to see sort of the same things year after year with just a little bit more depth. With math, though, you're building and building and building and building, and the content changes a good bit, particularly once you get up into late middle and early high school. So
Yeah, the standard deviation on those stayed the same versus ELA, it spread. So that told me some kids did well with the hybrid model and continued to learn, whereas other ones fell behind.
Yes,
Versus
absolutely.
math, everyone struggled, so.
yes.
Obviously, we've seen a slide, a regression, if you will. Is there a time frame we can put on that? Just based off the trends that you see? I mean, is it a?
You mean a time frame for
Well,
recovering?
Well, not even recovery, just we took a step back as if we always talk about the summer slide, but obviously this is on a much grander scale. Is it a 12-month, 18-month, 2-year, 3-year? I mean, if you look at just the pure numbers, it would suggest that we kind of seem to trend back to 2018 numbers, which would put you in that 24, 30-month, 36-month time frame.
So again, this is simply my opinion of it.
Sure.
So take that for what it's worth. I would say, given a focus on those things that we find in our academic recovery plan, if we look closely at those gaps that were, developed over the pandemic years, if we can focus on those things, I don't think it'll take as long to build it back up. I'm generally an optimist, so that's sort of the way I see it. But it is going to take a lot of focus on those areas in order to get us there, and some very hard work by our teachers, which they're already putting in.
And of course, it speaks to the need to do the interim assessments so we get a much clearer picture about what the gaps are.
Right.
Because of the flaws in the standardized portions of it for the last couple of years, that really can't tell us where the gaps are. The gaps are going to be identified in this interim assessment.
Right, and I'll mention something about end of course along those lines. End of course is a fine assessment. However, we get next to nothing back at the high school level and those upper level middle school kids. We get next to nothing back at the standard level as far as information about what kids actually know and are able to do. All we get is a number and a letter grade. And we've talked as testing nerds to our testing nerd group around the state about, when can we get some of that standard level data? Because we get nothing out of this to be able to help improve students' learning. What we do get with our interim assessments is data down to the indicator level that says, hey, you're good at this, but you're not very good at this. Let's work on this part, and here are some ways that you can do it. So that's why we're leaning really heavily on those interim assessments in our academic recovery plan this year.
I was going to, can I interrupt just a second? Mary, would you kind of highlight, remind the board about our academic recovery plan? I know we've talked about it in the past, but kind of in light of Dr. Phillips's conversation.
Absolutely, and we are looking forward to that interim assessment data. Our third goal actually in the academic recovery plan depends on that interim assessment data for us to identify those gaps and then really plan for what we're going to do this year. We're also going to use that data to, as Dr. Phillips alluded to earlier, sort of reestablish our goals and do what you just said, Dr. Guyton, sort of outline what it's going to take for us to get back to where we need to be. So that's the third goal. The first goal is in the area of early literacy and really thinking about especially our students with special needs and our multilingual learners. But early literacy across the board and what we can do to make sure we have those foundational skills in place that may have been missed these past few years. And our data from last spring let us know that we need to really focus on that. The second goal is in the area of middle school math. And we're going to have to be really focused on that. And we have Hillary Morgan with us tonight, and she may want to speak to that a little bit more. And then a fourth goal in the area of social and emotional learning.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the greatest tragedy outside of the obvious that can come from this pandemic is that we return to normal. Because we've gone through probably the greatest behavioral and psychological and emotional trial that pretty much every generation will have seen to some degree. And so in our rush to quote unquote get back to normal, you kind of have to take a step back and say, well, was that normal? Is that normal really worth getting back to? And so you bring up in the course exams, 20% just, I can tell you from sitting on this side, when I walk in an exam room and it's April, May, I'm starting to have discussions about anxiousness, anxiety, those kind of things. I call January my senior month because that's about the time my seniors start to come in. They're graduating high school. They haven't quite got that plan together, and their depression and anxiety is through the roof. And so I think there's an obvious tie between the social and emotional learning that occurs and end of course exam. You know, and if nothing else, we may have learned that maybe if it's not benefiting us other than giving us a grade, why does it have to be? Why do we have to hinge so much on it at one time? You know, can we stratify that with more interim assessments and different things like that to give us a better indicator? And so I would hope as we have gone through this pandemic that we will use this information, and the normal we get back to would be the desirable normal, you know, from what we've learned. It's good information, though. Thank you.
And I would add, Dr. Guyton, and building on what Dr. Phillips said about the end of course exams, I mean, I haven't ever really thought about it this way, but as you were talking, I mean, really, especially for the high school, the biology one, the U.S. history, those are exit exams. There's nothing for the student in that assessment other than it gets them out of that class. They get credit for the class. And any data you might get or information on those students, they've finished that course. They may never take another U.S. history class again. And so what you're doing is that data is only going to help the teachers figure out, well, where did I miss instruction for the next group? And so I can see this is really kind of shining a lens on, I mean, to me, the end of course exam, it's measuring our schools and our teachers, not our students. Are they being given what they need to be done with this class? And you know, if it's not benefiting the students anything other than either pulling their grade up or not harming it, you wonder where the benefit is, because it is so high stress. And, you know, and that it's that sword hanging over these students' head, especially, you know, you don't want to have to repeat biology 1, or you don't want to have to retake that stressful test. And so much pressure is put on a test that really has not no value, because you want a student to be able to take a cumulative test. I think that's important. But is that value worth what we're creating in this pressure chamber for these students when they take these tests? That's just, I've lived through a lot of EOCs as a parent, and they're extremely stressful.
They are. And to that end, my office preaches a lot to people about the use of assessment, not as an evaluative tool, but as an instructional tool. And that whole structure of end of course flies in the face of that a little bit, which is why I'm happy that we're able to use our interim assessments for, at least for ELA and math. Now, we don't have a lot to go on for science and social studies along those lines. And I mentioned earlier that there was an issue with science being only in grades 4 and 6. And so when you think about that, grade 7 is life science on the standards. So the only other time that you see anything related to biology used to be on 7th grade SC Pass science. But now that's gone. You just got 4 and 6. And so we have nothing instructionally and we get good information from SC Pass and SC Ready as far as instructionally at the standard level, right? Here's what our kids know, here's the standards they know, here's the ones they don't, here's what we need to work on. Once they get up to biology, they have nothing to look back on to see what are the gaps that need to be filled, which I think is an interesting sort of wrinkle there.
I have a few things just to kind of piggyback off of what you said when you're talking about the stress for the students. It's also stressful for the teachers too, because these are not assessments that the teachers are writing. And I remember my first year teaching Algebra 1, and I had a strong student after the test said, "Miss Henson, what is pitch?" This is an Algebra 1 class. "What is pitch?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" The problem wanted them to find the slope of the roof, but I had not taught him that vocabulary word. So he was struggling with, he knew how to find slope, but it was just a disconnect with the vocabulary. So, you know, there's good things and bad things. So, questions though. The middle level math that you guys were talking about, can you elaborate on that? Or you're going to talk about it next meeting?
We are going to talk about it next meeting, but
Okay.
it's fine. We can go ahead and, Hillary, do you mind giving an overview of what we learned through our data and our plan?
Hold on, Hillary. Hold on just a second. Can we get her on?
Thank you. Is this better? So we really saw areas in all domains in mathematics, all key concepts. So what we really want to refocus and kind of is on our instructional model, so that we're able to provide students and teachers with structures to allow for small group instruction so that they can assess students, determine their strengths and areas that they might need to improve on. We also are going to focus on, and have been, on that shift from heavy procedural and algorithmic approaches to mathematics to developing those procedures from the conceptual understanding. So really a good balance and providing opportunities for students to engage in meaningful mathematics and apply the mathematics, and focusing on those low floor, high ceiling tasks where they have multiple entry points where all students can find success, whether it be at the concrete level, the abstract level, the representation level, really just giving them a very firm understanding of the mathematics.
So for our middle school teachers, are they all teaching in their content area?
Like certification-wise?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I know that's something that a lot of districts are struggling with right now. You talked about for RTI, like tier 2 and tier 3 for our elementary literacy. Have we refilled all of those positions? I know last year, one school, for example, had 4 RTI teachers and 3 were pulled to teach grade level classes. And so there was only 1 at that school that was trying to meet the needs for all the students.
Yes, well, do you want to go first, and then I'll talk about this? Yeah. So all of the positions, unless Ms. Price tells me I'm wrong, are filled. But the reality is we are trying our best to provide those services this year. They are still having to cover some classes because of the low number of substitutes that we have available and the number of teacher absences. So it is our goal and it is our hope that we can not do that much longer, but in our current context, we are having to, I hope, less than last year, but it is still happening. And we think it's vitally important to be able to offer those services.